Good evening, everybody. Everybody hear me okay? Good. All right. Well, a pleasure to be here, and appreciate you turning out on such a not the greatest weather night. Don, thank you for that very kind introduction. And my shameless introduction or plug of who we are, we work with companies really all over the world, helping them identify where they should select locations, sometimes consolidate facilities, unfortunately sometimes close facilities. And then we work with states, regions, and communities, large and small, urban and rural, in helping them identify economic development strategies to move the ball forward. So we work all over North America. My firm is based in Atlanta. Thank you for hiring a firm south of the Mason-Dixon line. And just a sample of some of the firms that we've worked with, both on the corporate side and on the economic development strategy side. A lot of the work that we do on the corporate location side happens to be in the food and beverage sector or ag-related business. And so we have a joint venture with a firm in Atlanta called Primus, and we've created a national food site certification program, meaning we go into communities that ask us to do so, and we certify their site, which gives them a marketing heads up if they're trying to attract companies in the food and beverage sector. This is a sample of some of those firms that we've worked with. Very proud of the fact that one of those firms is Hatfield Quality Meats, the official hot dog of the Phillies and the Eagles, and so we've worked with them for a number of years now. So we have that Pennsylvania connection. So enough of that. Let's talk a little bit about why we're here. And the whole premise of this discussion is, you know, having worked in the economic development arena for as long as I've had, 33 years, 11 years now owning my own company, and the fact that we've worked all over North America, I've seen what has worked well in communities that drive economic development success, and I've seen what makes communities fail in the economic development arena. And so as part of what we wanted to do, because I've been so passionate about it, we wanted to share with you, you know, what makes the winners and losers in the economic development arena. So, you know, I'm often asked, what is economic development? I've been around a lot of academicians for a number of years. They've tried to describe it in a very complex way, and I believe in keeping it simple. And so economic development is all about wealth building, meaning what does it take to have a better community for the folks that live in your community, a better standard of living. And you get there basically in three ways. You get there through what we call the hunters. That's business recruitment. That's a key focus of what the LV EDC is doing. That gets the most attention by the news media. It's what governors pursue. And hunters would also include those that are involved in the hospitality industry when you're trying to attract tourists or conventioneers. You know, I used to work in Asheville, North Carolina. That economy is solely based on tourism. So that would fall in that capacity. The gardeners is where the majority of the jobs are being created in the United States today. That's the entrepreneurial side. So my company, I never thought I was an entrepreneur. I created my company. It's 11 years old now, so I fit in that bill. Some of you who are full-time workers in a business and part-time elected officials may fall in that same category. Okay? And then nurturers, those are your existing businesses. And for years I heard that about 85% of all new jobs are created by existing business, when in fact it's about 50%. So to have a successful economic development effort, you've got to have all three. You've got to have that three-legged stool of recruitment, retention, and growing business from the ground up. If you have that effectively, then you have a successful economic development effort. So there's a couple things about the economic development process that's constant. It never changes, and that is Attracting investment is highly competitive, and you've got to be totally prepared. Well, it's how competitive is it? There's 18,000 municipalities in the United States. There's 90,000 tax jurisdictions, and there's 3,141 counties. And they're all competing for business. I mean, good Lord, 18,000 municipalities, I think half of them are in Pennsylvania. And a good many of them are in the Lehigh Valley. So you have 62 of them. So, but you're all competing for business, okay? So it's those that stand out above the crowd, get noticed, and win, which is why you have to market yourself in the attraction of business both from the United States and globally, because a lot of the business that are coming to the United States today are global-based companies that aren't necessarily based here. Big project that was just announced and is going full steam ahead is down in Mobile, Alabama, where they're going head-to-head with Boeing on an Airbus wide-body aircraft assembly plant. So there's a great example. That's a company from France. So Tom Friedman wrote the book, The World is Flat, along with some other books, but he said something that really resonated with me that I saw some years ago at the end of the recession, and that is that there is no magic bailout package, there's no magic stimulus. Whenever we have a reset like we had with the recession, you've got to learn how to do things differently, because it's never going to go back to the same. And so we as communities need to make sure that we understand that it will never go back to how it used to be. Instead, you have to work smarter and differently to get ahead in today's world. So let's talk about what's the most important ingredient to economic development success. And this is the key. It's not the number of industrial parks that you have in the community. It's not the amount of incentives that you use to try to entice a company to locate here or incentives to keep a company here. Those are all important, and they're a means to achieve the end. But the key consideration, no matter where we go, anywhere in the country, the key number one factor to achieving economic development success is leadership. The quality of your public and private leadership drives economic development success. So let me see a show of hands. How many of you are elected officials that are here today? Elected officials. All right. I mean this with all sincerity. God bless you for being here. And I say that because in the work that we've done, leadership, especially quality public leadership, drives economic development success. It drives it into the community, or it will drive it out. So if you have poor leadership, it's driving a business out. If you have good leadership, it's going to drive a business in. The fact that there were so many of you that are here is a great sign and sends a positive message to people like me, because we're a site location consultant, sometimes referred to as a site elimination consultant, because in many instances we're looking for reasons to eliminate you, not to keep you. So policymakers who are elected officials, in my opinion and in the opinion of many of my brethren in this business, will all say the same thing. The quality of that public leadership drives economic development success. Why? Because with good leadership, you get the ingredients that you need, like the industrial parks, like the incentives, like the land use policies that you need to move forward. And without good leadership, you can't sustain that even if you already have it, you know? Because I've seen communities where there's been great leadership and they've had a lot of good tools, and then a new set of leaders get elected, they don't have the same commitment, and it goes down. And then leaders come back up, bring it back up, and so it's a cyclical thing. So I look at places like Charleston, South Carolina, that's had the same mayor for over 40 years, and they've had great leadership. West Monroe, Louisiana, has had the same mayor for 37 years, great leadership, very sustainable leadership. And then I've seen communities that have new leaders that come into a community, and they are focused to do the right thing, makes all the difference in the world. So, leadership determines the winners and losers every time. The most important ingredient in economic development success. If there's one thing I leave with you tonight, it's that. It's focus on that quality leadership and to nurture it. Now, I want you to think about your respective community when we talk about these items here. And so what do these successful communities have in common? Do you have a common vision for the future by its citizens? That's a key ingredient to economic development success. Is there a desire by both the public and the private sector in that community to achieve success? Is there a desire to unite for the good of the community and remove divisiveness? That's very important because in a lot of instances, companies and site location consultants will look at you before you know they're looking at you. They're reading the paper online, they're reading blogs, they're looking at what is going on in your community to see what kind of divisiveness exists, because all companies that are going to make a major investment are risk averse. And so if there's a lot of infighting going on, they'll move on. Remember, there's 18,000 municipalities. They'll move on to that next community that can meet their objectives. And do you as a community have the ability to adapt and change based on changes in local or global economic conditions? So a lot of those companies that we worked with that you saw their logos up there, they have a strategic plan, just like the LVEDC's working on doing right now, just like maybe some of you may have in your respective communities. But based on changes in the economy, they'll turn on a dime. And they'll adapt and be fluid based on what they need to do to be successful. Communities need to do the same thing. They have to have that same model of running themselves like a business if they're going to be successful. So, I'm not going to dwell on where the jobs are coming from. I just kind of want to point this out kind of quickly. Not surprisingly, and this is hard to see, but we get this data every year from IBM where they measure where all of the jobs and investment is going from around the world. And not surprisingly, the United States is the #1 exporter of jobs. Well, that shouldn't surprise you, and it shouldn't worry you either, because many of the companies are global companies that are based here in the United States. And so they're going to where the market is, as they should. Okay? We're the #1 exporter of jobs. Japan is #2, followed by Germany. The top-ranking destination countries, not surprisingly also, would be China, India, and the United States, which I'm anxious to see how this is going to shake out towards the end of the year, because I think it's going to change significantly based on, again, changes in the global economy. This is, well, let me go back 1 second. This is what scares me, however. We graduate in the United States about 200,000 engineers annually, about 200,000. Many of them have to leave the United States because they're here on a student visa. So they have to go home, wherever that place is. China and India combined, 1 and 2, we graduate 200,000, they graduate 900,000 engineers annually. And plus the cost of doing business is considerably less in India, not as much in China, which is why I think that's going to change pretty soon, than it is in the United States. That's scary. We've got to work on making sure that we graduate more technical people and that we can keep them here also. That's a key. Well, let's talk about states. South Carolina had a big project, and so there's the reason why they went from 6 to 1, followed by Texas. Texas has led the United States basically for the last 15 years primarily on projects, both new and expanding, because they have a concept that the state legislature did in 1979 called Home Rule. The legislature said, we think that local communities like you all can do a better job in economic development than the state telling you how to do it. So we're going to let you do a 1-cent sales tax for economic development. And as a result of that, I run into communities that have a population of 7, 8, 9,000 that are really resource rich with funding to do a lot of things in economic development, art centers, industrial parks, incentives, anything that they can hang the hat of economic development on. So where's Pennsylvania? Well, Pennsylvania is not in bad shape, actually, because this other group has measured the number of new locations or expansions, and of course Texas is number one, will always continue to be, in my opinion. Ohio number 2, Pennsylvania not bad at number 3. So there is enough diversity in this state geographically to where Pennsylvania will always be, unless the business climate really goes south, a key leader in the economic development arena. So let's talk a little bit about the site selection process, because I think you'll have a better flavor then of what companies consider important when they are looking at communities. Make no mistake about it, business is in business to make a profit. If they can't make a profit in one location, they move on to the next location. That's what it's about. So you've got to make sure that your business climate is conducive to allowing existing businesses or potentially new businesses to grow there. It's deadline driven. When I first got into this business 33 years ago, the average time that it took from when a company started to look at a location to the announcement was right at about 2 years. Today it's 6 months, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter. So the Volkswagen facility that located in Chattanooga a few years ago took all of 8 months. Baxter, that has a big medical device facility outside of the Atlanta area, took all of 4 months. So speed to market is important. If you're not prepared, the companies will move on. It's competitive. You've heard me say how many counties there are, 3,141, so not only are you competing domestically in the United States, but globally too on projects. And it's comprehensive. It's very analytical. It's the reason why I have to employ a full-time economist on our staff, because when we're doing a project like a food and beverage project, which could easily be $200, $300 million, we can't afford to make a mistake. And so we're measuring cost at all of these different locations, short-term and long-term cost, because the companies need to know that to make a credible decision on where to go. Geographic information systems is what has compressed the time frame from 2 years to 6 months, up or down, because of the ease of capturing information on where utilities are, labor force, and other geographic considerations. And then remember about the internet, that we're looking at you before you know we're looking at you. So for organizations like the LV EDC, or some of you who may represent a county or one of the cities, having the appropriate information on a website is extremely important. Okay? and especially for the marketing entity, which in this case happens to be the LVEDC. And then speed to market, shovel-ready sites are imperative, meaning it has to have water, sewer, all the infrastructure. Without the infrastructure, it's not a site. It's just raw land. And typically, companies will not consider just plain raw land. The infrastructure has to be there. And incentives are still a driving force for many companies. I happen to not be a big fan of incentives, never was, but they're a way of life. And so every time the National Governors Association would meet, they'd say, hey, we got to put a moratorium on these incentives. Enough is enough. And then the next big marquee project would come along, and then they're outdoing each other on the incentives, because they're all measured by job performance and capital investment. So you've got to use incentives smartly. It has to make sense. You have to show a return on investment. If it doesn't show a return on investment, you shouldn't do incentives. That's the key to making sure that it works effectively. That's what Texas has done so effectively with the local money that they use in their economic development efforts. Well, let's talk about the screening process, and there's 3 phases that really all firms like mine go through. We're doing a discovery phase, which is phase 1, where we're capturing information from the company, and then we're getting information from the community. We're looking then at the communities based on who might make a short list, and then we go into the negotiations. So all of that up here, again, takes about 6 months, 9 months, sometimes shorter, sometimes longer. But that's typically the process that you go through. It underscores why you have to be prepared. Because when we're sending out a request for information, we're sending it to folks like you, or we're sending it to the LVEDC, or to the governor's action team, somebody like that. They've got to complete that information accurately, in great detail, and quickly. That's when we start reviewing the information. And then making sure that you have those tools, the sites that are in place with the infrastructure, spec buildings if you happen to have any spec or empty buildings, things of that nature. And then that takes us into the negotiation process and then the decision-making process. So this is important because you're able to see exactly what companies consider important when they're looking at locations. This is not from me. This is from a magazine that surveys companies every year, large and small, manufacturing, office, distribution, a whole cross-section. I don't want anybody to tell you differently. Cost is as important today as it was 50 years ago. Cost of doing business in community A versus B versus C. So if you look at those 12 variables that are up there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of them are cost related. Okay? Key consideration. Well, what about quality of place factors? We don't really call it quality of life because quality of life is very subjective. But quality of place, you can kind of measure it. So, not surprisingly, number 1, public safety or low crime rate. Number 1 consideration that companies consider important when they're looking at a community. Followed by healthcare facilities. Well, we've looked at the crime stats for the Lehigh Valley. It's part of what we're doing. You show very well on there. Look at your health care. It's a dominant employer in the Lehigh Valley. You show very well on there. Housing availability, housing cost, your ratings of public schools all show very well. You have a few colleges and universities in the area, more than a few. I have met people who actually like cold weather. I'm not one of them. So depending on the climate, that goes well with some folks. Recreational opportunities and cultural opportunities. As an outsider looking in, I think you do very well in that area. So those are important. The quality of place, and then back here to the actual factors that companies are considering important. We're actually doing, as part of our job with the LV EDC, measuring where does the Lehigh Valley fit with these fundamentals and trends, and we'll be reporting on that later in this process in a few more months. So, well, let's talk about being prepared as a community, you all, and as an economic development organization, which would be groups like the LV EDC, or if there's any other economic development group that's represented in here tonight. So there's that three-legged stool. There's that holistic approach to economic development. Product improvement, your community is the product. Your community is what you are selling. Product marketing, how do you sell that product? How do you present it globally in the attraction and retention of business? That's what Don's group is meant to do. And then organizational. Do you have the tools, the strategies for outstanding economic development service delivery so that you can compete with these 3,000 plus counties in the United States? So, product improvement is everything from generating leadership development to your quality of place and community assets. Product marketing is understanding who the customers are, and in the case of a group like the LV EDC, they have really three customers. They have existing businesses, they have potentially new businesses, and they have site location consultants, companies like mine. Because about 35% of all projects are driven by site location consultants, which means you've got almost 70% that are driven by companies. So you've got to spend as much effort really on companies, if not more, as you do with site location consultants. And then organizational. Do you have the vision to have an effective economic development effort? Do you have the tools, the funding, and the program? So that's your holistic economic development program. That's what will allow you to achieve success. So let's talk about regionalism. For the last 2 days, I've conducted 8 focus groups with several of you that I look around were in those focus groups. So we had focus groups meeting with business people, entrepreneurs, educators, and government officials. Had 8 different focus groups. And the discussion about the importance of a regional effort rather than a parochial effort was extremely important to the people who were in that focus group. We heard it in all 8 focus groups. So the importance of regionalism can't be emphasized enough, but it works 2 ways, and I'm going to mention that in a minute. So why regionalism for economic development? Because companies seldom will look at boundaries initially. They're looking at the region. They're primarily looking at the region because they're focused on labor force. And in many instances, most companies are looking at about a 45-minute drive time from where they're going to put a facility. That's the typical type of drive time they're looking at. And of course, in these 2 counties, from different points in those 2 counties, 45 minutes take you in lots of different places around the region. So labor force, extremely important. And the fact that you have, I drove around in June for 2 days in 2 counties. And it was challenging for me to understand where I was in one municipality versus the other. So they'll have the same issue. That's why they're not looking at borders. They'll look at borders at the very end when they're focused on the property. Then obviously they're interested in the borders. New business and existing business expansions generate return on investment for the entire region. Typically, the larger the company, the greater the multiplier. So that's another reason why you should be focused on regionalism. And then in the case of LVEDC, you've got 62 municipalities. Most of you wouldn't have enough funding individually to go out and brand and market yourself. So you have to rely on a regional group to do that for you, which is typical throughout the United States. And that's why you need an organization like the LVEDC. And we talked about those boundaries and why they aren't important at first, but they become important, which is why you have to have good policy to allow and drive that business investment into your community rather than driving it out. So you need a strong economic development organization in place so that you can respond to proposals quickly, so that you can communicate effectively, and that you have a strong web presence, which I know Don's going to be working on because it's not there yet. But he knows that, which is why he's trying to fix it. But, and this is the big but, you still have to have a local economic development effort, which means whether it's the mayor or a borough manager, town manager, doesn't matter, somebody who can communicate and discuss the ABCs of economic development with a company that may be considering locating within your community. If you're interested about economic development. If you're not interested in economic development, you don't have to worry about it. You know, and that's okay. We've seen a lot of communities that have said, we don't want anything more. We want to shut the door behind us. They're entitled to do that. When you do that, you're going to dry up as a community, but that may be what you want to do. So, if you do want to grow, you have to have that local presence to support the regional presence. You can't sacrifice a local economic development effort by thinking that a regional effort is going to do everything for you. They can't. They just can't, especially in the environment that you're in right now with 62 municipalities. There's no way a regional group could represent on a local level those 62. So, I'm not going to go through this data. I just want to show you how people are looking at you when you don't know they're looking at you. So, you know, Lehigh Valley is not an MSA. Lehigh Valley is not a metropolitan statistical area. Does everybody understand where I'm coming from with that? It's a manufactured region. Your MSA consists of 4 counties, 1 in New Jersey and 3 in Pennsylvania. But there's a natural synergy between Northampton and Lehigh, so you've created this own. But people don't see that because remember, Lehigh Valley is not on the map. It's on a map with a local TV station. But outside of that, it's not a geography. Allentown is, Bethlehem is, and Easton is. So this is the data that people can pull up free of charge from either the Census Bureau or, in this case, there's a joint venture between the University of Indiana and the U.S. Department of Commerce called Stats America. And Stats America has information on every MSA, every micropolitan area, and every county in the United States. So this is what companies would be looking at if they're looking at the MSA. Because the MSA is branded the same way as the airport. which is the ABE airport. Okay? So that's what people are looking at when they're seeing you. Now, here's how the public sees Lehigh County. Same way through the Census Bureau and Stats America. Here's how they look at Northampton County. Same way through those public sources. Now, what we've done, my economist has just started to do this, this is how Gartner Economics sees Lehigh Valley. So what we've done is we have to take all the data from Northampton and all the data from Lehigh, and then we have to do our own calculations and create our own database that Don will then use to promote the Lehigh Valley. So we look at this, and I'm looking at SAT scores, and we're going to have dozens and dozens of variables when we give this to Don. I think in mid-December is the first big deliverable. But I look at this and I see this is pretty good because the Lehigh Valley has a combined SAT score of 1509 versus 1498 for the U.S. versus 1461 for Pennsylvania. So you're smarter than the U.S. and Pennsylvania, but you all knew that, which is why you live here, right? So that's part of it. Don has asked us to benchmark the Lehigh Valley to Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, and to two counties in North Carolina that have a lot of similarity to you all. Guilford County, which is Greensboro, North Carolina, and Winston-Salem, which is Forsyth County, North Carolina. So you're smarter than those two counties too. So this kind of gives you a flavor of what we're doing. This is something else that we put in. This is the average wage per job. This is a two-edged sword, by the way. Two-edged sword, because Lehigh Valley, the combined average wage is $44,683, which is below the U.S. and below Pennsylvania. So why is it a two-edged sword? Because when companies see that and cost is important to them, it's going to attract positive attention. The difficult part of it is for the people who live here, it's not as high as it could be or needs to be. So that's why it's a two-edged sword. But in terms, if you have it too high, then of course, obviously, companies are going to walk away from the area. And then here's our percent total manufacturing employment. Lehigh Valley is at 10.6%, higher than the U.S., higher than the state of Pennsylvania, tied with the North Carolina counties, and higher than Allegheny County. So you'll see a lot more of this down the road. We just wanted to kind of give you a flavor of you can't capture that information from any kind of public source because it doesn't exist. It's a manufactured region, so that's what we're doing. So, this was one other that I thought was pretty interesting too. You've got 83,000 people of Lehigh Valley's workforce are in commuters, driving in. You've got 97,000 who are leaving the Lehigh Valley, and you've got about 175,000 that both live and work in the Lehigh Valley. You got hammered hard in the recession. You probably know that. You were coming out of it pretty good. You had some drops and some ebbs and flows. So it'll be interesting to see when we update this where you are. This is pretty recent, though. So with that, let me summarize and then open it up for any discussion and turn it back over to Don. There is no perfect place. If there was, we'd all move there. So site selection is a process of elimination. Remember, we're site elimination consultants. But in my opinion, especially as an outsider looking in, and for someone who is working all over the country, looking at other communities, you show very well. You have a lot of competition. We talked about that. You've got to do what you need to do to stand out above the crowd. That's key. You've got to have that regional effort. You're doing that in terms of marketing. Okay? Don's charge is to ramp it up. He's committed to do that. You're going to see a whole lot more of that in 2014. All companies are risk averse in site selection. We're looking at fault lines, we're looking at tornado alleys, we're looking at hurricane zones. Every time I work with a company, right after a hurricane, they say, we don't want to be anywhere south of Interstate 10. Interstate 10 is what goes from Jacksonville, Florida, all the way to LA. Cuts right through the Gulf Coast. 2 years later, they forget about it. They may put a facility, another hurricane comes, and they go, what have we done? But the insurance companies are driving this now. The insurance companies are saying, here's, if we have a problem with this location, we're not going to insure it. So risk averse is key. Your website is your #1 marketing effort. So you still, as communities, if you have a website, need to make sure that it is a valuable website for newcomers, potential investors, entrepreneurs, anybody. And because of the internet, it has really shortened that time frame. Shovel-ready sites are imperative. We will never look at raw land. You don't have to worry about that. It has to have the infrastructure to place. And incentives are a major driving force, but you need to have incentives defined for your community. There's been a number of communities that have done that effectively. I always like to use Wichita, Kansas as an example. Both the city and the county have the same incentive policy. You need a long-term executable vision for your community. Even small communities need to have a strategy. I'm a small business. I have to have a strategy and be proactive and not reactive. Same with communities. The Economic Development Organization, in the case of like LVEDC, needs to have a plan built on creating success. Don't try to be everything to everybody. Focus on what you're good at. And we're going to be working with LVEDC to help them in those identification of those targets for the region. And have that holistic program that focuses on recruitment, retention, entrepreneurial development, and tourism if applicable. In this case, tourism and convention attraction is a key component. So don't make any small plans. Shoot for the stars and fully fund your economic development efforts. Be innovative in everything you do, from a one-stop permitting effort, if it's applicable to you, to entrepreneurial programs that will allow small businesses to flourish and grow. And enhance your quality of place. It's what differentiates you. So when I drove around the 2 counties over that 2-day period, I saw some pretty good quality of place, and I saw some areas that needed to fix themselves up. You need to work to differentiate you all the time and don't become complacent. And lastly, get along, rise above the pettiness, and work to resolve divisiveness. So thank you all very much for the opportunity to be with you this evening.